Hola. Hola. Hola, muy buenas tardes a todos y todas. Bienvenidos a esta jornada del ciclo de conferencias de Education, Revolución Educativa. Desde Education estamos intentando impulsar la transformación educativa y para ello tenemos diferentes líneas de acción. Una importante, la que creemos mucho, es el desarrollo y la promoción del uso de evidencias en educación. Llevamos ya 3 años, hace 3 años que empezamos a pensar en esta línea de acción, como algo que podía ser diferencial para mejorar las prácticas educativas y a partir de ese momento lo que empezamos fue a identificar qué prácticas a nivel internacional se estaban llevando a cabo, pues para no empezar de cero, sino para aprender. Y ahí fue cuando tuvimos la oportunidad de contactar con la Education Endowment Foundation, que es una entidad británica que es referente en el uso de evidencias en la toma de decisiones en educación. A partir de ahí construimos una alianza, formamos parte de una coalición internacional que está liderada por la Education Endowment Foundation y en la que Education es el partner español. Entonces, lo que hemos hecho con ellos ha sido, en primer lugar, traducir su toolkit, que es su repositorio de evidencias, para hacer accesible esa transferencia de cómo utilizar la evidencia en educación. Y hoy lo que os invitamos es a reflexionar sobre esta cuestión, sobre cómo la evidencia puede ayudarnos a tomar decisiones en educación. Partimos del hecho de que tenemos la suerte de hoy contar con Steve Higgins, que es, el creador de este toolkit, de este repositorio de evidencias y que tiene una larga experiencia en cómo, sobre todo, que yo creo que es lo importante que hoy podamos debatir, en cómo trasladar la evidencia a la práctica, Y eso es un poco lo que le hemos invitado a compartir con todos nosotros, toda su experiencia, toda su trayectoria y todo su conocimiento en cómo podemos trasladar la evidencia a la práctica educativa. Esta jornada, este ciclo de conferencias de Revolución Educativa, un poco lo que tiene como objetivo es intentar aproximar a diferentes expertos en diferentes materias, sobre todo en clave internacional, sobre cómo se está llevando a cabo los diferentes temas que abordamos desde Education. Y en este caso hemos invitado a Steve Higgins a que nos pueda explicar la experiencia de la Education Endowment Foundation, que, como os comentaba, surgió en el año 2011 y que está liderando una coalición internacional, porque realmente este tema no es solo un tema que esté encima de la mesa en clave europea, sino que también a nivel internacional existe ya una corriente, una reflexión sobre cómo podemos llevar a cabo esta cuestión, Entonces, hoy veremos en esta conferencia, por una parte, estará Steve Higgins explicándonos toda su experiencia y su conocimiento, pero luego también habrá una parte donde tendremos un panel donde no solo nos quedaremos en la parte más teórica, sino que os invitaremos también a poder conocer experiencias ya de la práctica educativa. De hecho, la Education Endowment Foundation lo que ha creado ha sido una red de escuelas que son las Research School, que son ya escuelas que han incorporado el uso de la evidencia en su práctica diaria. Hay muchas veces que cuando se habla de la evidencia dice, bueno, está muy bien, pero luego eso yo cómo lo traduzco en mi día a día, en mi práctica diaria. Y justamente lo que hoy queremos traer aquí es un caso de éxito, un caso que ya existe y que se intenta replicar, Entonces, yo creo que en el día de hoy, en esta hora y media o 2 horas que podamos estar trabajando este tema, lo interesante es poder reflexionar y conocer buenas prácticas en relación al uso de la evidencia en educación, que es algo que nos puede ayudar a fundamentar cómo mejorar las prácticas educativas en el aula. Así que, por mi parte, dar repaso a Arantxa a empezar esta conferencia e invitaros a que en el momento de generar debate o cuestiones, que sea participativo. Yo creo que estamos en un entorno que es cercano, con lo cual cuanto más participativo, pues yo creo que será más rico para todos en la jornada de hoy. Así que muchas gracias.
Hola, buenas tardes. Antes de empezar, temas así más prácticos que me han dicho que os diga. Sí, el micro, sí que hay diferencia. En la bolsa tenéis como una tarjetita que aparece el wifi, el código el nombre del wifi y el código, el password que tenéis. Y también es un QR, Víctor. Es un código que vamos a haceros una serie de preguntas. Este acto va a ser un acto participativo en algunos momentos del evento. Y para conocer vuestra participación lo haremos a través del televoto, que es una aplicación y podréis ir contestando. Veréis en este papel en el que tenéis el wifi, el código, también tendréis el password del televoting, que es una aplicación que se llama Vote Phone. Claro.
Básicamente, os harán las preguntas y veréis que es una aplicación que desde Google Play o Android lo descargáis y no pasa absolutamente nada. Uy, perdón. Y dentro de la tarjetita hay un código y veréis que en vuestro móvil podréis ver la presentación y cuando Arantxa, Marta, Steve, quien sea, os hagan preguntas, podréis votar con vuestro móvil, básicamente.
Muchas gracias, Víctor. Este acto, ahora invitaré en unos segundos a Marta Ferrero, que ahora os la presentaré. Haremos una breve introducción, después daremos paso a Steve Higgins, que viene de la Education Endowment Foundation, que también os presentaré después. Y pasada la keynote, su presentación, haremos una mesa redonda en la que estaremos Juliet, de una Research School de la Education Endowment Foundation, estará Steve. Tendremos también a Javier de Suma y una vez terminada la mesa redonda haremos un turno de palabras, dudas, conversación y ya daremos por finalizado el acto. Así que, Marta, ella es Marta Ferrero, está en la Facultad de Educación de la Complutense de Madrid. La hemos invitado porque es una de las pocas personas, porque no somos muchas las personas ni las entidades que trabajamos para la promoción, ¿no?, de las evidencias en educación, y Marta es una de ellas. La podéis seguir en Twitter, me gusta que tu hashtag tienes el de pseudociencia.
Sí, suelo ponerlo mucho. Soy Ferrero-Mar, puede ser, no lo sé ni yo, pero mi cuenta creo que es Ferrero-Mar. Marta estaba cogido ya. Sí.
La hemos invitado porque tenemos algunas preguntas para ella. La primera, que yo creo que es la más importante, ¿es medible? ¿Se puede medir la educación?
Pues la respuesta es simple y breve y es que sí. Claro, hay que especificar más, ¿no? Sería esta pregunta como preguntar si se puede medir la salud. Sí, se puede medir el impacto que tienen diferentes métodos, recursos, medidas educativas. Se puede medir qué importancia tienen los conocimientos previos de los alumnos. Se puede medir qué impacto tiene el liderazgo de los equipos directivos en el aprendizaje de los alumnos. Se puede medir muchas cosas y además de forma objetiva. No es fácil porque en la educación entran muchas variables en juego: el tipo de alumno, el nivel socioeconómico de la familia de ese alumno, el contexto, el barrio en el que se ubica el centro, las características del centro. Son muchas variables, pero se puede medir. No es fácil, pero se puede y merece mucho la pena.
Y una vez medimos, ¿no?, porque dices que sí, que la educación se puede medir, una vez tenemos estos resultados, ¿cómo podemos utilizarlos en la educación? ¿Son útiles? ¿Son utilizables?
Claro, aquí hay una labor muy, muy importante que parte, yo diría que de los investigadores que hacen estudios en materia educativa, y es hacer un esfuerzo por transferir lo que obtienen en sus estudios, bien en laboratorio, bien en aulas, a la práctica diaria de los centros. Es ayudar a los profesores a traducir los hallazgos en prácticas concretas. ¿Qué pueden hacer en el aula? ¿En qué se traducen los hallazgos en el trabajo del día a día dentro de las aulas?
Porque ahora que hablas de la práctica, ¿no?, ¿qué es lo que podemos aplicar en el aula, cuáles son esos hallazgos que podemos aplicar. La cultura de la evaluación no está muy presente en nuestro día a día educativo por varias razones que las intentaremos ir abordando a lo largo de la jornada. ¿Eso quiere decir que trabajamos en el aula basados o fundamentados en creencias?
Pues en creencias, también en experiencias aisladas, personales, de determinadas personas. Y claro, esto tiene sus limitaciones, porque lo que a una persona le funciona en un momento dado puede no funcionar en otro, porque no está controlando variables como el tipo de alumnos que tiene delante, el número de alumnos que tiene, sus propias características. A veces alguien puede decir, si utilizas este recurso en el aula, funciona. Y se lo dice a toda una audiencia de profesores. Ya, pero antes de lanzar esa generalización, ¿has medido si en ese resultado positivo lo que ha influido ha sido el método que has usado, cómo lo has usado, el tipo de alumnos que tenías, la organización del centro, los recursos de los que disponías? Un profesor puede tratar de investigar y evaluar, y debiera evaluar todo lo que hace en el aula, porque es evaluar el impacto de su trabajo. Pero este tipo de investigación no se puede generalizar a todos los centros escolares, por ejemplo, de su barrio, o de su ciudad o de su país. Para eso hace falta una investigación más controlada, más sistemática, y es labor de los investigadores, claro.
¿Hay mitos en educación, en el aula?
Pues hay mitos en todas las facetas de la vida, ¿verdad? Y en educación no nos libramos de ellos.
¿Nos podrías
claro.
decir algunos?
Por ejemplo, el mito más prevalente, no solo entre los profesores de nuestro país, sino en países tan diferentes como Reino Unido, Países Bajos, diferentes países latinoamericanos como Perú, Chile, Argentina, otro país muy alejado como China, es que si adaptamos la forma de enseñar a los estilos de aprendizaje de nuestros alumnos, van a aprender mejor. Este mito es muy popular. Muchas veces cuando alguien dice que es un mito, que es una idea errónea, se levantan las cejas entre la audiencia, puede que lo esté haciendo ahora, pero esto se ha demostrado una y otra vez. Esto no quiere decir que todos aprendamos de la misma forma, pero tampoco se traduce en que se nos pueda encasillar en una clasificación concreta de estilos de aprendizaje. El más famoso es el de que hay estudiantes auditivos, visuales y cinestésicos, pero hay muchísimas, hay veintenas de clasificaciones diferentes de estilos de aprendizaje, y se ha demostrado una y otra vez de forma muy sólida que un profesor adapte su forma de enseñar a estos estilos concretos no mejora el aprendizaje de los alumnos, no hay ninguna duda.
¿Por qué no lanzamos un mito? A ver qué...
Venga.
Lanza una pregunta.
Pero entonces tenéis que ser sinceros, aunque hayamos dicho que es un mito, ¿eh? Por ejemplo...
¿Qué creencias hay así más comunes para conocer a ver qué es lo que piensan las personas que nos han acompañado?
Otra idea también muy extendida en educación es que se puede clasificar a los estudiantes, se puede explicar su forma de aprender de acuerdo a su dominancia hemisférica. Más popularmente dicho, que hay alumnos de cerebro izquierdo y de cerebro derecho.
Va. En clave de pregunta,
Entonces,
¿cómo lo dirías?
Si yo os dijera, hay estudiantes de cerebro izquierdo y de cerebro derecho, ¿sí, no o no sabéis?
¿En el televoto lo tenéis preparado? ¿No va? ¿Os funciona? ¿No? ¿Lo hacemos con mano alzada?
Venga.
Lo hacemos con mano alzada.
Sí.
Va.
Bueno, ¿quién diría que sí? Que se puede clasificar a los estudiantes por cerebro derecho o cerebro izquierdo. Venga, animaros, que se vean bien las manos. ¿Veo alguna por ahí? ¿Alguien más? ¿Vale?
Is it working? ¿Alguien más? ¿No?
Claro, es que los hemos
¿Qué dice
puesto.
la evidencia?
Pues la evidencia dice que no, que ambos hemisferios trabajan siempre a la vez. Luego, no tiene ningún sentido esperar que en unos estudiantes vaya a funcionar un hemisferio sí y el otro no, y que esto explique su forma de aprender. Ambos hemisferios trabajan siempre juntos en todas las tareas y, por tanto, no explican las diferencias que podemos encontrar en estudiantes.
Otro mito.
Otro mito. Solo usamos el 10% del cerebro. Sí.
¿Quién dice que no? ¿Quién dice que no es verdad?
Pues aquí
¿Qué
también
piensa la gente? ¿No? ¿Cuál es esta creencia general?
Por ejemplo,
nos han dicho que no, que usamos más del 10%.
Pero cuando se pregunta a profesores, en concreto de nuestro país, desde infantil hasta bachillerato, pasando por FP en centros públicos, concertados o privados, en torno a un 30% dicen que sí, que solo usamos un 10% del cerebro. Y en cambio, afortunadamente tenemos muchas pruebas que indican que no, que usamos el 100% del cerebro. Ya si usáramos una parte, si dejáramos de usar una parte mucho más pequeña que un 10%, se podrían apreciar trastornos muy importantes en la persona. Incluso podrían verse personas en estado vegetativo. Hoy en día, además, disponemos de pruebas de neuroimagen que demuestran cómo se activan todas las partes del cerebro, que no queda ninguna parte por activar. Y sin embargo, pues es un mito muy prevalente. Los orígenes son muy variados, pero a día de hoy todavía muchas personas creen que solo usamos el 10% del cerebro.
O sea, cuando preguntamos a la gente si hay alumnos, ¿no?, que
sí,
hemisferio derecho, izquierdo, o si realmente
sí,
esta concepción de que se usa solo el 10% del cerebro, hay un gran número de gente que realmente cree que sí,
sí.
Y la evidencia nos dice que no, ¿no? Son estas creencias sobre las que funcionamos.
Efectivamente.
¿Algún otro mito que se te ocurra?
Pues, por ejemplo, que las personas que han nacido
Hazlo
y
en
crecido...
pregunta.
¿Existen los nativos digitales?
¿Existen los nativos digitales? Dicen que funciona esto. ¿Sí? Venga, va, pues probamos el televoto Quedan...
Pues dicho de otra forma, son aquellas personas que han nacido y que han crecido ya cuando las tecnologías estaban muy presentes y que muestran unas capacidades muy sofisticadas para aprender a partir de información que hay en la web. De manera autónoma, claro.
Bueno, no lo vemos, pero el sí y el no van a la par. It's equal, right? ¿Qué dice la evidencia? ¿Qué sabemos sobre esto?
Pues la evidencia dice que las personas que han nacido dentro de esta era digital, a la vez que las que nacieron antes, necesitan que se les enseñe a manejar las nuevas tecnologías, que necesitan que se les enseñe también incluso a buscar información. Se hacen pruebas muy interesantes, como por ejemplo se analizan qué tipo de palabras se introducen en los buscadores, ¿no?, en los motores de búsqueda. Y se encuentra, curiosamente, que no son nada eficientes, no introducen palabras claves, núcleos nominales como sustantivos, sino que meten preguntas, oraciones enteras, tal y como piensan en lo que quieren buscar, lo introducen. Y claro, esto devuelve unos resultados muy, muy poco eficaces. También se encuentra que es verdad que quizá los que han nacido varían mucho en la franja de edad que se considera, pero bueno, a partir de mediados de los 80, principios de los 90, sí que es cierto que suelen usar con más frecuencia las tecnologías. Pero aquí viene la letra pequeña. Las tecnologías que usan no son sustancialmente diferentes a las de los no nativos. Lo que más usan son los móviles, los ordenadores, como hace una persona no nativa digital. Y además el uso que hace de ellos es muy similar. Es mucho de ocio, de redes sociales y no tanto, por ejemplo, de uso de herramientas de creación de conocimiento como los blogs o las wikis. Luego...
Estas creencias, ¿no?, que aquí vemos que van un poco a la... ¿no?, podríamos decir en 50-50 entre los de sí, ¿no? Esto es un ejemplo de lo que ocurre en el aula con muchísimas, ¿no? En muchísimas situaciones y con muchísimas prácticas.
Sí.
¿No? Estamos en los claustros algunas veces, o en educación en general, no solo en el aula, ¿no? Hay mucha opinión
Sí.
y poca referencia a evidencias.
Sí. Yo diría que en nuestro país en general tenemos poca cultura científica a nivel de sociedad y en concreto entre el profesorado. Y yo me incluyo, yo he ejercido muchos años de maestra y de orientadora en la educación escolar. Ahora estoy en la universidad, pero he estado ahí y me siento muy identificada. Igual me extiendo mucho, pero hay muchas razones que explican esa falta de cultura científica.
Yo creo que aquí, y es una de las razones por las que hemos invitado a la Education Endowment Foundation a venir, yo creo que ahora es momento de dar paso a Steve Higgins.
Sí, sin duda.
Porque puede poner luz en nuestro camino. Uno de los motivos por los que desde Education nos hemos aventurado en este camino de la evidencia educativa es para romper en los mitos de educación, para promover una educación informada en la evidencia y para que las conversaciones entre docentes y entre profesionales de educación puedan tener un fundamento riguroso, ¿no? en experiencias que han sido metodológicamente evaluadas. La Education Endowment Foundation, para los que no lo conozcáis, es una entidad británica que nació hace aproximadamente 10 años con esta voluntad, con la voluntad de dar información a los docentes sobre la efectividad de intervenciones educativas o medidas educativas que se aplicaban en el aula. Todo esto llevó a la Education Endowment Foundation a evaluar proyectos de terceros y les llevó también a crear una red de centros educativos, que son los que se llaman Research School, que a la vez crea dos proyectos dentro del Endowment. Por un lado, la generación de evidencias y por el otro lado, una red de colegios, laboratorio o de hubs que han aprendido a usar y a generar todo lo que nos dice la ciencia. Steve es el líder, el director científico del Toolkit. El Toolkit es una herramienta que ha generado la Education Endowment Foundation. La tenéis en inglés en su web y en español en Education. En esta web del Toolkit podéis ver que hay 34 temas desde metacognición, feedback, aprendizaje cooperativo y podéis ver si funcionan o no, si es barato o no de aplicar y Steve nos va a hablar un poco de qué es esto, cómo ha surgido y por qué los profesores está bien que lo consulten. Marta, nos sentamos y escuchamos a Steve. Qué bien. Steve. We are all yours.
Thank
Do
you.
you want me to have that?
No, it's okay. And I can use this? Okay. Thank you very much for that introduction. You've probably gathered that I'm Steve Higgins. I work at Durham University, and I work closely with the Education Endowment Foundation in London. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm very grateful to Lakeisha for the invitation. We've spent some time today working with teachers from the region, and I'm starting to understand a bit more about the context in which I'm talking. I'm hoping that I can make this interactive. If something I say you just disagree with, please put your hand up or shout out or even heckle, and I'll try and respond, because I think this will work best if we can make it a conversation. I've got some interactive questions. Let's see how well they work too, because they get some way to doing that. I can also tell you the research about clickers and interactive systems if you're interested, because it's an area of interest of mine. Okay. Can I have a quick show of hands? How many of you are school teachers and have come from school today? Well, kind of a big thank you to you for doing that, because I know what it's like. My background was as a primary school teacher, an elementary school teacher. And when I moved into higher education and became a lecturer and a researcher, I was really frustrated at the amount of evidence there was, admittedly in very, very boring journal articles, but that would have helped me as a classroom teacher. So I learned things about teaching early reading, about teaching early mathematics, that if I'd known when I was in the classroom would have made me a better teacher. So that's made me passionate about trying to find ways to summarize, to synthesize and present evidence in a way that helps teachers' decision making. And I want to make that really clear right at the beginning. Evidence can never determine what you should do in the classroom, but it can inform the decisions that you make. And that's my starting point. And I'll try and explain why that is as I go through this presentation. I think we need evidence-based or evidence-informed education because sometimes we don't see what's actually happening in our classrooms. Classrooms are very hectic places. We see the activity that children do, but we don't see the learning happening inside their heads. When they start a new task, could actually most of them already do it before we taught them it? At the end, have they really learned it, or have they just learnt to simulate it, or perhaps even have copied from the person next to them? So seeing learning is really hard. So we take other proxies for learning in the classroom. We look at their engagement, their focus in their work, their enthusiasm, the things that they say, and that tells us a bit about the learning that's taking place. But we make mistakes. We're all subject to human bias. We have our own theories about what works, and we tend to confirm that by what we see and what the children do. So sometimes we need a cold, hard look at what the evidence says to challenge those assumptions. So it checks whether things are as effective as we believe they are, and it also sometimes tells us that things don't work as well as we expected. So I was part of the world that investigated learning styles, and I think you've just been hearing about visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learners. We now know that that's not a good thing to do, to target learners according to that learning style. If we'd known more about evidence, perhaps 15 years ago, teachers in England wouldn't have spent so much time developing lessons with visual, auditory, and kinesthetic activities. We'd have known what's important as having a range of strategies to teach, and that learners need to make connections across those representations. So in mathematics, being able to read an algebraic formula and visualize what that looks like as a graph is essential to learn mathematics. Just doing the visual or written wouldn't be sufficient. So we need to think really carefully about the way we teach and the assumptions that we have. I'm also passionate about this idea that we need to know what doesn't make a difference, because as we start new things in education, as we pick up, I hope not the latest fad, the latest evidence-based approach, we need to know what to stop. It's not as though there's plenty of time in the school day where you can keep doing new things. When you start doing something new, you stop doing something else. The trouble is we don't always know what. We squeeze it in and other things get squeezed out. So making conscious decisions about what to stop and what to start are, for me, the main reasons why we need evidence in education. How do we find these things out? I think, and I'm going to try and persuade you of this tonight, that evidence gives us best bets. It doesn't give us certainties. I can look at the education research evidence and think about, on average, what's been successful across lots of studies, in other classrooms, for other teachers. I don't know that it'll work for you. I don't know your class. I don't know what you're teaching. But I can give you a good bet on the kinds of things that are likely to be successful. And I'll talk a bit later about how I see this partnership between researchers and teachers working in terms of where the different professional skills and knowledge are needed. Okay, why do we need evidence? Another take on this. These were this was one project funded by the Education Endowment Foundation that had two arms. So there were two versions of this intervention. A control group as well, but in one part of the project, the catch-up numeracy intervention had been developed by Oxford University, some of the people that know most about the way children learn mathematics in the country. The activities that the children were given intensively on a one-to-one basis were based on diagnosis of the children's capabilities. There was a control group, as I mentioned, but we also designed this study with an additional arm where the schools were given an equivalent amount of money to run the same intensive additional one-to-one support, and they designed the activities. So, which of these do you think we expected, and perhaps which of these do you think the team at Oxford expected to work better? The one with the Oxford University designed programme, or the time equivalent comparison? Okay, vote when you're ready. Just checking with Victor that this is working. So I've still got a question mark at the top. Thank you. So what we try and do at the Education Endowment Foundation is we not just try and summarize evidence to produce the toolkit, we try and generate evidence. So this is an example of generating evidence addressing schools' concerns about children who are falling behind in numeracy mathematics at primary schools. We know that that gap tends to increase, particularly for children from disadvantaged backgrounds. Oh, also fairly equal. Yes, when we designed this study, it took a bit of persuading the Oxford team that we should have this time equivalent control. Now, the Oxford-based programme worked. It was successful. The children made about an additional 3 months progress compared with what children in the control group made, an effect size of 0.21 for those of you used to effect sizes. But the striking thing was that the time equivalent control, the interventions designed by the schools themselves, were actually better. So what do we conclude from this? We conclude from this that catch-up, intensive additional support, helps children to catch up with their peers. But perhaps we have to be careful about constraining too much the program or the materials that children use. I can't explain fully why there's this difference, but perhaps in identifying the activities for the children, the teachers in the time equivalent group already knew their children really well. Perhaps they were better at diagnosis than the diagnostic test used in the research. So this was a real health warning for the Education Endowment Foundation, because without this arm, we would have concluded that the program works, the materials work, when actually what worked was the additional intensive support. Okay, now that's one study. I'm not suggesting that one study is ever sufficient in any research. I'm a meta-analyst, for those of you who are familiar with the field. It means I like to collect as many studies as I can and look at the average effects. And the reason we need to do that is exemplified by this diagram from medicine. So we hear every week in the press that this food is bad for you or this food is good for you, and next week it's bad for you and it was good for you last week. And it's very confusing. But if you look at the different areas where there are different studies of the relationship between these different foods that we eat, or foods and drinks, and the risk of cancer that are from those, you can see that there's a wide spread. So this is the good side on this half. This is the bad side on this half. So if you're Spanish and you like wine, actually that's not a bad thing. I'm not as well off as a British person liking tea. But what we don't know from this is what's a good bet and what's a bad bet. If you're a wine drinker, perhaps you trust this study and you disbelieve this study. If you like eating your beef, you're definitely not going to believe those 3 studies, you're only going to believe those. It's exactly the same in education. So these are the areas of the toolkit, and these are the different meta-analyses and studies that have been conducted in these different areas. something that's striking in education is, actually, when we try to improve things in education, generally we succeed. The positive side of the chart is more strongly populated. But there's a huge range. So sometimes things work extremely well, and just occasionally they work incredibly badly. So that, for me, gives the idea of the risk that's involved in these. So trusting one study is always going to be dangerous. We need to see the picture and pattern of studies and start to understand what drives that variation. And that's what led me to try and create the toolkit. Originally in English, there's now a Spanish version, thanks to La Caja. What I suppose we were trying to do was produce something like a consumer guide. In England, we have a magazine called which looks at cars and washing machines and all of the different consumer products and rates them on what they're like in terms of cost, in terms of durability. And it's that I think we were trying to capture in this top level of the toolkit. Let's take areas of education research and let's try and work out what the better bets are and what the riskier bets are. Let's not just look at things that have worked, let's look at things that haven't, because teachers need to know about that. We've been very lucky in England. The particular nature of the way education's worked over the last few years means that this has been welcomed by the teaching profession. And nearly 2/3 of head teachers consult this in the sorts of decisions they make. And Juliet, who's here and will be on the panel later, represents one of the research schools that we work with that try and promote the use of evidence across the system. The focus was actually on the increased amount of money that our government was giving schools to address the performance of disadvantaged students from disadvantaged backgrounds. So in England, we have a bigger gap between our more and less advantaged students than in most other countries, well, certainly all other countries in Europe, in Western Europe. And that's been a national problem for us. How wealthy your parents are seems to influence how well you do at school more than we're comfortable with. That doesn't seem right or fair. So schools were given additional money to spend to try and address that disadvantage, and the toolkit fit into that particular context. So schools found it useful in making those decisions. So what we tried to do was to find all of the meta-analyses and reviews of different areas that were of interest to teachers. We looked at the impact on learning, and there are some warnings here, some caveats here, in that we look at tested attainment. And some of the things we do in schools aren't about improving reading or mathematics. Most of the research that's been done looks at those kind of core areas of the curriculum. The other thing to say is that these are averages. And as I showed you on the previous slide, there's a spread. We need to bear in mind that spread. So just because something works on average doesn't mean it's going to work for you. You might be at the bottom end or you might be at the top end. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. We tried to collect experimental designs, and that's where we differ from John Hattie's work, for example, where we've looked at where schools have tried to bring about a change and there's been a control or comparison group. So we've tried only to use those studies where there's a comparison group. We've estimated the size of the effect, and then we've converted that into months gain. So we've looked at the progress students typically make over a year and partitioned out effect size into that progress. That has its problems, and again, if anyone's interested from a technical point of view, I'm more than happy to talk about that in more detail. Then we also looked at the costs of adopting a new approach. Now, this isn't all of the costs. It's not the amount of time that teachers need to spend, for example. It's the additional outlay that a school would need to start doing this new approach. So if it means buying in new staff, then that would be included in the cost. But if it means using resources that you already have in school, that wouldn't be included. it also doesn't include the effort that's required to make these things work. We've talked about having, rather than shields for the strength of the evidence, something like shovels for how much effort it would take, because some things are easier to do than other and some take more teachers' time and energy. So we've got the impact, the strength of the evidence represented by shields, and the typical or average cost. But remember, these are averages. We do draw where we can on international evidence. So in terms of reading comprehension, there's a very good meta-analysis produced by a team at the University of Navarra, where they've looked at improving reading outcomes in Spanish using comprehension approaches. And there were about 39 studies. So although I wouldn't guarantee that we've collected all of the evidence that's in Spanish, we do try and make this as international a search as possible. The key question is, what's evidence-based education for? And I think we have to start with the idea of evidence-based education is to improve learning outcomes for students. That's where we start, and sometimes when we get caught up in the debate about why we should and shouldn't do it, we forget that it's about improving outcomes. It's about developing teachers' skills in making choices that will improve their practice, that will improve outcomes for learners. And that's at the heart of what we do. As I mentioned before, it's also just about checking now and again that things we think are working actually are, or realizing that actually most other people don't seem to make this work. Is it really working for me? So using it as a sense check on the practice that we do. And at that way, it can perhaps form a starting point for professional reflection, debate, and discussion. What is it that makes this successful? Why does this work? How often do we think about why something's working in the classroom? Our chief exec at the Education Endowment Foundation, who's started off the EEF, I think makes a really important point that evidence doesn't trump professional judgment. And it's really important to make that point. It can supplement teachers' decision-making. It can enable you to see as a teacher what other people have learned in other research studies. So we don't have to learn everything from scratch. But what it can't do is guarantee that it will be effective for you. And as I mentioned, I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Okay, I'm going to give a few practical examples of how this might work and what it might look like across different areas of learning. I'm going to start with looking at problem solving in mathematics. And the approach that the EEF recommends is very much a problem solving approach. Don't start with the evidence and just apply it. Start with identifying a problem or issue that you think can be improved in your school. What's an area of concern? What is it you want your pupils to get better at? I think that makes it much more likely that a research-based solution will help you. It suggests that you've identified that you might be below average in that area and you want to improve it. So things that have worked for other schools on average are more likely to help. If you're already a very effective school, then actually doing what works on average for other people might not help you. It might make it worse. So starting with a problem that you want to fix means it's much more likely that you're going to find something that's successful. The approach that we promote is talking through the solution. Will this work here? Do we already do this? How does it work? What is it we need to change? How good a bet is it? How risky is it? If it's a relatively safe bet, then you probably just need to monitor lightly whether or not it's doing what you intended. If it's a risky bet and other people it hasn't worked for well, you might need to monitor and think quite carefully and perhaps even measure the impact it's having in your school. Then I think you try it out and see how effective it is for you. And if it works, you keep it. And if it doesn't, stop. Don't keep doing it and trying to make it work. So then you might think about different sources of evidence. You might look at the toolkit as a starting point and think about where there's room for improvement. So problem solving, complex skills. We want to improve that in mathematics. So looking at something like metacognition and self-regulation strikes me as a good place to start, because that's about encouraging learners to take control of their own planning, monitoring, and evaluation of their own work. And that's often what goes wrong in problem solving. You can't learn it as an algorithm. You can't just learn it as a simple recipe. You've got to think and monitor as you go. So that's what's difficult about problem solving. It has to make sense. So this area is likely to be a good match. And the Education Endowment Foundation produces evidence-based guidance reports. So there are two that would be relevant here. One's on metacognition and self-regulation, and tries to take the toolkit evidence and make it more practical. And then there's another on improving mathematics for children in upper primary and lower secondary. So looking at those might give further indications of what might be successful. And one school I worked with then looked into the detail and identified something called the Improve Math Strategy, which was researched actually originally in the 1990s, but has been tried out in other contexts. And what that strategy suggests you do is the Improve is an acronym, and the idea is that you introduce new concepts, you train the students, you teach and model how to do metacognitive questioning. Then there's a process of practice. You try and address and overcome any difficulties that learners are facing. And the aim is you keep going through that loop until you're sure that the learners have mastered that particular approach of asking those questions and solving the problems. Then there's some process of verification, checking that they can do it and have retained that. And then a process of enrichment at the end, where you widen the problems and see how robust that strategy is. The sorts of questions the students are trained in doing is to ask three kinds of questions. Comprehension questions. What does this actually mean? Are there any maths teachers in the room? You'll know when children do problem solving, they often don't look at the detail of what the words say. They look at the numbers and try and work out, oh, we've been doing division recently, so let's just divide these numbers. They don't actually make sense of the problem, or they struggle with converting the language into the mathematical operations. And they try and do that too quickly. So slowing them down by getting them to ask comprehension questions is very effective. Then the next stage is asking strategy questions. How am I going to do this? Have we done it before? What are the ways that we could tackle this? And then at the end, when they've solved the problems, what's this like? What have I learned? What am I going to be able to transfer? And that process of asking those kinds of questions is at the heart of this particular strategy for improving problem solving. Now, it's worked several times in other places for other teachers, but I'm not going to guarantee it'll work for you in your school. It's probably worth a go because at least it's got some research and evidence behind it. What often happens is teachers will say, oh, I do that, I do that, I do that. And actually, when they look in detail at what they do, they don't work through all of those questions. They don't check for mastery, and they don't then verify and enrich. So they do the introduce new concepts and practice, introduce new concepts and practice. Or am I being too cynical? He says, looking at the maths teacher. Okay, let's think of another example. Peer tutoring. There's a long track record of the impact of peer tutoring in education. This is where the learners teach each other in some structured way. There are three broad approaches. One is same age, where one learner in the same age group teaches another in a pair. Another is cross-age, where you take children usually 2 years older, perhaps in reading or mathematics, and they come and work with a class of pupils 2 years younger and teach them. that gap is important because we also want the tutors to benefit from the teaching that they do. And that gap of 2 years seems to be about right, that they have to think hard about representing what they know. So they can already do the reading or the writing or the maths, but they have to think about how to talk about that, and that's a metacognitive skill, to explain what they're teaching. So what you often find is that in cross-age tutoring, the older tutors gain as much as the tutees. We've all, I'm sure, have had the experience of when we teach something, actually we start to understand it better ourselves, and again, that's what this builds on. The other structure is reciprocal peer tutoring, where learners take it in turns to be the tutor. And they might have a series of structured questions that they ask, a series of prompts, and then they swap over. And each of them get the chance to monitor. The thing to note is that, in general, both benefit, both the tutor and the tutee. And there's some evidence that particularly as children get older in secondary school, that it benefits lower attaining pupils who are struggling, students who are struggling more than it does those who are doing well. The opportunity to become a teacher and to be trusted to teach changes their self-esteem and also forces them to think about what they do know and are capable of doing. Not all studies are successful. It's not a panacea. It's hard to get the time. You've got to train the tutors. You've got to give them feedback about how they're doing. So it requires quite a lot of investment of time and energy to do it well. Crucially, you've also got to get the level of the task right. It's got to be something that the tutor can do, but the tutee can't. So they benefit from that practice. It can't be so hard for the pupil who's doing the learning that the tutor struggles because they don't have the skills and expertise to teach it. So getting the match right of that task is crucial. But there are consistent wider benefits. Another project that the EEF's done recently is texting parents. So the EEF's looked at a whole host of things, and engaging and involving parents is an important part of most schools' educational strategy. Now, the main advantage of this, it didn't have particularly big effects. There were small effects in mathematics and on attendance, so attendance improved. This was secondary schools. But it was very cheap. It cost about €7 per student over the course of a year. And a little bit of gain in attendance and mathematics for that cost, it's worth the risk. It's not a high-risk strategy. And they were sent information about homework, about different topics, about whether students were absent, or that it was some general supportive information about how their children were doing. Okay, I think there are some key points for evidence use. It's got to solve a real problem. Don't just pluck something from the toolkit or from visible learning because you think it sounds like a good idea. Think about something that will help an area that's challenging at the moment. Work out what you actually need to do, and then think about how will you know that it's working. My key point is, to do that, we need to look at what the students are doing. We think an awful lot in education about what teachers do and how teachers change. But unless the students work harder, for longer, more efficiently or more effectively, why will their learning change? It doesn't matter how much harder the teacher works, if the students just work as hard and in the same way, why are they going to learn more? And we don't always think of the consequences of the changes that we put in place in terms of how is it changing what students do. Okay, there are 30 or so areas in the toolkit. I'd like to give you the opportunity to vote on me talking a little bit more about a couple of those areas. So again, if you're happy to choose one of these topics, for me, digital technology, feedback, social and emotional learning, and mentoring, pick one and I'll talk in a little bit more detail. Because one of the challenges with evidence use is in each area, as you dig down, it does get more complex. There's a lot to know in terms of understanding why these things make a difference. Are we okay, Victor, for the... What I've tried to do, and since working with the Education Endowment Foundation, we've tried to collect areas of practice that schools want to know more about. They do vary, so digital technology is a very big field. Feedback's a particular set of processes in classrooms. Okay, so that's social and emotional. Yeah, and in some ways that doesn't surprise me. Yeah, I think that's of concern to many countries at the moment. How are children learning to be in schools as well as in terms of what they're learning? The important thing with approaches to improving social and emotional learning is they may be necessary for more effective learning to occur, but they don't guarantee that it will. So we know we can improve children's behavior. We can improve aspects of the way they feel about themselves, their motivation and their engagement. And there are different ways to do that. The risk is that when we've done that, we stop. And we don't then capitalize on those changes to get the students working harder or for longer, more efficiently or more effectively. So we stop when we've addressed the social and emotional learning need. Now, that's particularly true when you use targeted programs at small groups of students. We solve the problem, they're not a behavioral problem anymore, they seem happy in school, and we forget to notice whether or not it's improved their learning. So these approaches can be necessary, but they're not sufficient to make sure children learn better. And it's really important to bear that in mind. They can be absolutely essential in making sure we've got a learning environment in which students feel comfortable, they can be challenged, they trust that the teacher will respect them and their capability. That might be an important ingredient in making sure that's in place. But then if we stop there and don't use that to challenge the students and get them to take risks, then we lose the benefit from those social and emotional learning approaches. Okay, let's try another one. Metacognition and self-regulation, collaborative learning, parental engagement, and reducing the number of students in the class, so having smaller classes. It works. One of the challenges for the toolkit is these are sometimes very different kinds of areas of research, and it's sometimes difficult to compare the outcomes. Well, let's see what people have gone for. Do you have Who Wants to Be a Millionaire here, or a program like that? It's kind of ask the audience, isn't it? Now this is much more finely balanced. In fact, it looks like... I can't see the numbers. What's the winner? Is it D? Well, I might have to say... sorry? They're exactly the same. Thank you. That's right. I'll try and do all three. I've talked a little bit about metacognition and self-regulation in the example I gave of problem solving in mathematics. It's about, for me, transferring the responsibility for learning to learners. Now, that's a big ask. For me, it's, if you like, the holy grail of teaching and learning. If you can share that responsibility with learners successfully, then of course they're going to learn better. The challenge is in how you do that. What we know about these approaches that encourage learners to plan, monitor, and evaluate their own learning, that's the metacognition, or to manage their motivation, their resilience, their persistence. That's more of the self-regulation. That these approaches can be very successful. They're a good bet. They're actually relatively low risk, because by and large, when people try and improve that, they do. But the challenge is matching the strategies to the learning content. You don't want to do strategies that are too general. It's got to be specific to the difficulties learners are facing at that time. It's no good just teaching them general strategies of self-management. It's got to be managing your thinking about this piece of writing or managing this thinking about this piece of mathematics. So it's got to be mapped onto the subject. The other interesting thing about this is that actually learners who tend to be typically successful often don't like being slowed down and being asked to think about and monitor. They resist the articulation and being taught strategies because they're really good at doing it themselves. They're good at working out what to do. They often don't feel as though they need that help. So often it's those who are struggling a bit who will benefit most from being taught these strategies explicitly. So it's a good strategy to make sure learners are included, or even get the higher performing students to articulate the strategies they use to the other students and see if they can copy them. You'll probably be surprised in that they often can't articulate them. They do it automatically, and to think it through and explain why they're quick at something can be quite difficult for those learners. Collaborative learning. There's too much here. You'll have to invite me back for another talk to do collaborative learning, because this is a vast subject. And I think that's probably the one point I need to make, is that it isn't just one thing. The key issue for me is how well you match the collaborative activity to your learning goals or intentions. Are you going for fairly simple or straightforward outcomes in terms of knowledge? In which case you want simple collaboration structures. So something like think, pair, share, or pair team games to learn multiplication facts. So keep the structure simple for simple outcomes. Where you're looking at more complex outcomes, then you might want to build teams and think about how the teams interact and teach different roles. Of course, that varies with age. Younger learners can probably only do simple collaboration structures. As they get older, they'll be able to do more complex ones. The other thing to remember is we probably want to do collaborative learning not just because it's efficient. We probably want to do it because it achieves other outcomes. It encourages learners to take responsibility for each other, to show respect to each other, to build on capabilities, to be able to communicate well. Now that might be not in your maths plan for the term, but they're key skills that we've got to fit in somewhere. Reducing class sizes. Yeah, okay. This is never a popular one, because my main point about reducing class sizes is it's not cost efficient. Children do tend to do slightly better in smaller classes, but you've got to have classes of about 15 before it really makes a difference. Now that, in most education systems, nearly doubles the cost of education. You need twice as many teachers. Where are you going to find them who are as good as you are? And doubling the cost, tax, you're never going to get that one through, even with a new government next week. It's nice, and of course it feels more comfortable. I much preferred teaching in a class of 22 to 35. You feel as though you're more effective, but actually the evidence suggests unless you change your behaviors, unless you teach in a different way with fewer children, it's not going to make a difference. If you teach the class of 35 exactly the same way you teach the class of 22, why are they going to learn more? You've got to change the way you teach and to change the things that you do. So I'm sorry, it's not an easy solution. It would be lovely if we could have classes of 20 or less, and particularly for younger learners, perhaps even smaller, but that would be very expensive. Okay, just before I finish, I want to talk a little bit about this partnership that I see between research and practice. I think it's really important to see it as a partnership. So I think researchers are responsible for the top half of my diagram. Research needs to be accurate. You need to be true to the research. You need to make it accessible, and that's what we've tried to do in the toolkit and the guidance reports. But it also has to be actionable. You've got to have a starting point as a teacher in terms of what you do. I think the bottom part of the diagram is important that we respect professional knowledge and judgment. So it has to be appropriate, applicable, and acceptable. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So the accuracy for me as a researcher is absolutely essential. I've got to find a way of summarizing complex research, and lots of it through averages, in a way that I'm not misleading the person who uses it. Now that is in direct tension with research that's accessible, because I could print all of the detail, have all of the effect sizes, the meta-analytic detail of what drives heterogeneity and what the variation is. But then that would turn most teachers off. There isn't time to look at that. So I've got to put it in an accessible form, and that means simplifying. So those two features are in tension. And then making it actionable, well, that's hard, because I don't know a lot about your classroom and the problem that you're trying to solve. I can do that, but the key thing I think there is if I can communicate the causal pathway, what is it that made the difference? Why did it work? And the challenge in education is we often know what's worked, but not why. So that's a real challenge for me as a researcher. I think the appropriateness is something to do with the age, the type of school, the context, the subject, but also the level of use. So I've been mainly thinking about it from the point of view of teachers, but it might be from the point of view of the head teacher or even a policymaker. So how appropriate would this be to context? And then, sorry, I mixed those two up, haven't I? Go back. Applicable and then appropriate. Getting my buttons mixed up. So, sorry, applicable to context and then appropriate to a specific problem. So what is it you're trying to solve with this research? And then the final one is about what's acceptable. And we've learned a lot about this in England. The Education Endowment Foundation have found that some things schools are ready to change about. They've been quite happy to accept the evidence. They know that area is problematic. And other areas, schools have been quite resistant. They don't want to change what they do. They firmly believe it works. And no amount of evidence is actually going to shift their belief. So I think we've got to work with schools, and I'll talk just in the final few minutes about the model we use, to get schools to trust the research and to trust those findings in a way that they start to believe things that perhaps intuitively at first they don't agree with. So the findings themselves are only a start. So the toolkit is where I started. The Education Endowment Foundation has then started working to produce guidance reports to have an impact on practice that way. But then the EEF realized that that's not enough either. So it set up a network of research schools that it works with actively. And each of those schools works with schools in its region. They're like research champions, and Juliet's here from one of the schools in Lincolnshire, Cairo Research School. So the EEF give a bit of support to that school, and then that school works with other schools to champion the research, to test out new things themselves, and to communicate those research findings. Because we've realized we need to build trust in the system so that people accept the findings from research. And it's not straightforward. A published research paper isn't going to change your practice on Monday morning when you've had a busy weekend and you already had the lesson planned. Thank you.
No, we're going to do a round table. Yeah.
Panel.
That's yours.
Thank you.
Ahora vamos a invitar al panel a Juliet. Ahora los presento. Please have a seat. Javier González es el director de Suma, que ahora también os cuento un poco más sobre Suma, y también le invitamos a venir aquí. Solo para contextualizar un poco, ¿nos veis si estamos sentados? Should we stand? ¿Sí? Si nos levantamos mejor? ¿Sí? So, it's okay if we stand up?
Are we singing?
It looks like, right? Because, we are not like... Pues un poco para contextualizaros esta mesa, la idea es traer gente, entidades que trabajan para promover las evidencias en el aula desde diferentes espacios. Javier González de Suma es una entidad que está basada en Chile y trabaja con 10 países de Latinoamérica. Trabajan, corrígeme si me equivoco, en la capa intermedia entre políticas educativas y práctica docente, y ellos promueven, usan y generan evidencias. Por otro lado, tenemos a la Education Endowment Foundation, que después del speech de Steve ya conocéis, que es una entidad que trabaja para generar y transferir y compartir las evidencias dentro del Reino Unido. Después está Juliet, que how do you the name of your research school? Kyra. Su research school es Kyra. Where is it? In the north?
In the Midlands.
Okay.
East Midlands.
Pues, tenemos todos geografía. Vemos Inglaterra, la parte media de Inglaterra.
Nottingham Forest.
Very good.
Y su punto de vista, tenerla hoy aquí en el panel es muy interesante porque ella hablará y podrá dar el punto de vista de las evidencias dentro del centro educativo. Por lo tanto, tenemos diferentes niveles en los que se trabaja, o sea, es posible trabajar, y además de diferentes territorios, ¿no? Que ya no vale el no porque esto es en Inglaterra y los anglosajones, sino que en Latinoamérica se está llevando, con todas las diferencias además también que puede haber entre países, y aquí también lo estamos haciendo. Un poco, voy a lanzar una serie de preguntas, pero me gustaría también que cuando acaben, si tenéis dudas, os las apuntéis para poder crear un diálogo entre nosotros, y ya que les tenemos aquí, pues resolver o comentar todo aquello que consideremos. Víctor. We're going to chat some questions,
Okay.
and then we're going to talk about them. Bueno, yo, mientras todo esto va, voy a lanzar una.
Do you want the clicker?
No, I think I don't need that.
Okay.
Mira. Qué bien. No, el tema de las evidencias tiene diferentes barreras ¿no? Creemos que puede tener diferentes dificultades o elementos que puedan impedir. ¿Qué factores son los que impiden o dificultan que la educación se trabaje en base a evidencias? ¿Creéis que es falta de tiempo? ¿Creéis que es ausencia de herramientas contrastadas de evaluación? ¿Ya habéis respondido? Ahora. ¿Falta de recursos para la formación docente y de directivos? ¿Ausencia de un canal comunicativo entre investigadores y docentes? ¿O todas las anteriores? Ya, ¿ves? Tú ya habías dicho que ya habían contestado. En 15 segundos lo vemos. 10. Ahora vemos. Claro, es que como no estabas, ahora tú dices la votando. Y veremos qué es lo que opinan. Okay, so the answer is going to be difficult because we have to cover all the other points. What do you think about?
Yeah.
Voy a hablar en castellano.
Yeah.
¿No?
I'm afraid that teachers always say lack of time, but Juliet will be able to talk a little bit about actually the schools that really want to do it make time, they find time, because there is no spare time in schools. And it's working out what can we squeeze out, where can we find the time, because time is always an excuse in schools. It's always too busy in schools. And that was the reaction we had years ago. There isn't time to do this, there's too much to do. But schools in the UK have found time.
So I would say that if we're going to use evidence to inform practice and to improve pupil outcomes, then actually using evidence needs to be embedded in whatever we're doing. So you find time by making it the thing that you do, so it underpins everything else. So you're not trying to find extra time, you're just changing the practice and the culture. So maybe the conversation, or maybe the question is, how do we change the culture to be able to have time? Yeah.
What about, perdón, can you see?
Yeah, sorry. I'm not good with this.
Aparte de la falta de tiempo, ¿no? Brevemente, ¿cómo podríamos justificar o cómo podríamos reflexionar sobre las otras? La ausencia de herramientas contrastadas en evaluación, la falta de recursos para la formación o un canal de comunicación. ¿Qué de estos elementos, con cuáles estáis trabajando o tenéis, ¿no?, alguna actividad o algún proyecto para intentar paliar esta concepción o esta dificultad que se percibe?
¿Quién es?
Adelante.
Me presento porque creo que los otros ya... Sí, no, pero no importa. Mi nombre es Javier González, soy director de SUMA, que es un centro de investigación regional creado por el Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo y trabaja, como decía muy bien Arantxa, con varios gobiernos en la región. Soy además profesor de la Universidad de Cambridge en temas de desarrollo económico y social. Respecto al tema de la evidencia, y lo hablamos también en la mañana, que hubo un panel, ¿no es cierto? Efectivamente hay cierta resistencia a veces al tema de la evidencia y que tiene que ver con entender la naturaleza misma de que la evidencia a veces no es neutra. Muchas veces se percibe como una agenda de control, una agenda más bien liberal de uso de datos para controlar y para generar responsabilización a las escuelas. Y bueno, hay cierto rechazo y eso yo creo que tenemos que estar conscientes de eso. Pero lo que abogamos nosotros es que de alguna manera esta evidencia puede ser utilizada adecuadamente para generar capacidades en los docentes y por lo tanto posibilitar la autonomía de ellos en la medida que se ocupa adecuadamente para generar esas capacidades. Ahora, respecto a por qué no se usa, y quien se haga unas preguntas, a mí me faltan quien se haga algunas respuestas acá, que tiene que ver con entender el proceso mismo de utilización de evidencia y que tiene que ver con que de alguna manera no es que la gente no quiera a veces ocupar la evidencia, sino que muchas veces, bueno, la evidencia, como sabemos, es muy prolífica en el sentido que año a año aumenta el conocimiento en el mundo y por lo tanto es muchas veces difícil de sintetizarlo, entenderlo, lo que se llama, ¿no es cierto?, el bounded rationality, ¿no es cierto?, de alguna manera una racionalidad limitada de los agentes de poder entender esta evidencia. Pero también hay otros factores que son importantes, porque si no nos abogamos nosotros por lo menos de que sería una visión naif pensar de que simplemente la gente no la quiere ocupar o simplemente no sabe. A veces la gente simplemente tampoco no la ocupa porque por supuesto hay temas culturales, ¿no es cierto?, en el cual se contrasta esta evidencia con lo que creemos culturalmente que es lo legítimo y aquello que debe hacer un profesor, ¿ya? Yo ponía el ejemplo de, por ejemplo, profesores en Uruguay, donde hemos hecho muchos focus groups, donde efectivamente la repitencia, hacer repetir a los alumnos, es visto por los mismos profesores como una señal de ellos mismos de buena calidad. Es decir, si yo como profesor hago repetir a mis alumnos, estoy mostrando que soy exigente. Por lo tanto, culturalmente lo legítimo es esperar, ¿no es cierto?, de que un profesor haga repetir. Cuando uno le muestra la evidencia, hay un choque cultural. La evidencia que muestra que la repitencia, por cierto, tiene un efecto negativo. Entonces hay una negociación con lo cultural. Y finalmente, y con esto termino, creemos nosotros muy importantemente, lo pongo, que tiene que ver con los temas y las simetrías de poder. Justo ahora también estaba comprando aquí en la Caixa un librito de Foucault, pero interesante, ya habla del orden del discurso, ¿no es cierto? El conocimiento es poder. ¿Y qué tiene que ver con eso? Tiene que ver con que, bueno, de alguna manera hay una negociación de asimetrías de poder que se van, ¿no es cierto?, en este tema de las evidencias y también en el tipo de evidencias que nos convienen o no nos convienen. Entonces, hay que tener una visión completa de por qué de alguna manera existen esas resistencias, algunas son legítimas, y también, bueno, cómo se abordan adecuadamente para no ser mal utilizadas. Por cierto, del punto de vista, y aquí termino con el tema de la escuela, sí me parece que hay algunas evidencias que requieren ciertas condiciones estructurales. Por ejemplo, con la Caixa, de hecho, desarrollamos unas guías de orientación docente respecto, por ejemplo, a la retroalimentación formativa que hacen profesores a alumnos, y eso requiere una serie de condiciones para hacerla, especialmente, por ejemplo, las horas no lectivas, ¿no es cierto?, Si no hay un porcentaje importante de horas no lectivas, es muy difícil que un docente pueda efectivamente preparar esa retroalimentación. Entonces, es un conjunto de variables bastante complejas, tanto a nivel de la estructura misma del sistema educativo, de estas relaciones de poder que existen y que no nos podemos hacer un poco los locos porque existe eso. La pregunta es cómo podemos entonces llegar a utilizar de manera adecuada y más consensuada esta evidencia y cómo se moviliza a través de la estructura del sistema escolar con ciertas condiciones habilitantes. Por ahí más o menos creo algunas hipótesis.
Yeah, I'll just pick up a couple of those points. When I started off very much from the point of view of a teacher, in that I think the evidence that I found would have helped me be a better teacher in the classroom. And I think most teachers want to be better teachers and to get the best for their students. And then, as we've worked with the Education Endowment Foundation over the last 10 years, I've realized there are another important set of reasons why we need to do this. One is it helps schools to develop more consistent sets of practices as the teachers themselves develop a common language to talk about aspects of pedagogy, teaching and learning that they don't normally talk about. So that then becomes part of the staff conversations, more about learning. And then the other level that we became aware of in some of our recent governments is some of our ministers like to tinker at the level of pedagogy, and they recommend things that are not appropriate, or they recommend things that will work for some schools but not for all. So I think it's important that teachers understand what they do and why, so they can resist at times when that's necessary in terms of what they know is best for the children in their school. So it can be empowering for professionals as well. It's also just much more satisfying to know why you're doing something. Not just what you're doing, but why you're doing it. Our teachers in the research schools report that as being part of what motivates them. They enjoy knowing why things work, and that then motivates them to find out more.
Shall I say something about communication? Yeah. So the Research Schools Network, part of our challenge is to communicate, be the bridge between the evidence and practice. So we have sort of formulated strategies for how we communicate via, might be a monthly newsletter where we're pushing what's the latest evidence, what's coming out from the EEF or any other credit-worthy organisation, should I say, including universities. Just for Steve. But also, we're very active on Twitter, so trying to capture the social media presence. Many teachers in the UK are on Twitter, as I imagine many of you are here. But also blogging, so trying to capture all the different ways of getting the message out there about what's the evidence saying, and then also turning it into, so what could it look like in the classroom? Always bringing it back to, so what does this mean for practice and also pupil learning?
Vamos a la siguiente pregunta, a ver qué opináis. ¿Por qué crees que es necesario generar evidencias en educación? 1. Desarrollar una mirada crítica frente a las nuevas metodologías pedagógicas. Compartir conocimiento entre la comunidad educativa, mejorar la calidad educativa, implementar políticas de equidad educativa, todas las anteriores. Esta, la tendríamos que quitar. No es discriminante. No es...
I should comment on the research about clickers. The questions you ask determines the value of what you get back and the quality of the question. So in the classroom, you would never include todas las anteriores. Sorry.
We should be more evidence-based, right?
You'd force the decision to get feedback. Anyway, if anyone's interested, ask me later.
That's not a validated. The last one, perdón, la última, ¿no? Todas las anteriores. Sin embargo, han habido votos en la segunda, que es compartir conocimiento entre la comunidad educativa Y la 3, que sería, ¿no?, la respuesta para mejorar la calidad educativa. ¿Qué opináis vosotros? ¿Por qué creéis que es necesario generar evidencias en educación? Juliet, empiezas tú desde la propia práctica, ¿no?, desde el propio centro. ¿Cómo contestarías esta pregunta?
So I suppose the best way for me to answer it is, what are we doing about generating evidence? So within Cairo Research School, we run small trials, but actually they're not really that small because they might have 400 or 900 pupils involved across 40 schools. But in terms of, they're not officially large-scale trials. So recently we ran a 6-week trial on multiplication times table fluency, and we ran it for 6 weeks, 4 days a week, 15 minutes a day, when the class teachers were asked to either use a very procedural approach to teaching times tables, or a conceptual approach where it was more about problem solving, or a blended or a combined version of the two. We thought that was really powerful. It engaged 40 teachers who perhaps wouldn't have engaged in generating or contributing to the evidence base. So on a very practical level, that's what we do, but you need to design it properly, and you can't just make it up.
That's one of the changes I think the Research Schools Network is driving, in that in the existing literature that formed the toolkit when we started in 2010, 2011, most of the research questions were driven by researchers or by policymakers, and that was one of the reasons why that research didn't feel applicable to schools, and you had to dig quite hard to find research that was applicable. In working with the Research Schools Network, they're now generating questions for the EEF to test. So there's a program of teacher choices and school choices, so the sorts of decisions teachers make and the sorts of decisions that head teachers or principals make. And that's now driving another set of research questions. So we're seeing a more even balance of the way questions are asked. Because researchers like me in universities often have big theory questions. They want to understand the theoretical perspectives on motivation. They don't want to know what the most efficient way to mark a set of 30 books is to save the teacher 2 hours every evening. So things like that, the interests are different, and we need questions driven by practice, but we also need questions driven by theory.
Creo que es importante, la generación de evidencia, especialmente porque hay muchas áreas sobre las cuales no tenemos mucha información. Como Suma somos parte del Consejo Asesor de la UNESCO para el seguimiento de la Meta 4, de básicamente proveer garantizar el derecho a la educación de calidad, equitativa e inclusiva. Hoy día tenemos 24 grupos de investigación en 19 países, y lo que estamos haciendo es buscar en aquellos grupos que hoy día no sabemos respecto a cuál es la calidad de educación que tienen. Y me refiero a grupos que generalmente están bajo el radar. ¿Qué pasa con los jóvenes? Y me pregunto, yo estoy seguro que en Madrid tampoco sabemos, ¿qué pasa con los jóvenes que están hoy día en las cárceles? ¿Sabemos qué tipo de calidad realmente de la educación están recibiendo? ¿Qué pasa con los jóvenes migrantes? ¿Realmente sabemos qué tipo de calidad están recibiendo? ¿Qué pasa con los jóvenes LGTBI? España es más pluralista, tolerante en esos temas, pero por ejemplo en América Latina no es tanto. En muchos países, por ejemplo en Chile, 68% de los niños dicen sufrir bullying homofóbico en su propia escuela. Entonces, si no sabemos lo que pasa con todos estos grupos, que en sociología se llaman los grupos más bien invisibilizados, ¿no es cierto?, es difícil saber qué hacer si ni siquiera sabemos su situación. Entonces, primero que nada hay un tema de que falta mucho por saber, especialmente para los grupos realmente excluidos. El segundo tema tiene que ver con un tema ético. Hay un tema ético porque cada vez que un profesor toma una decisión pedagógica, ¿no es cierto?, de hacer A o hacer B, vuelvo a mi ejemplo para seguir con el mismo ejemplo, la repitencia, si decido hacer repetir o no repetir a un niño, obviamente es una decisión ética, finalmente, si es que realmente va a tener un efecto positivo o no sobre él, sobre su aprendizaje y su desarrollo como persona. Y finalmente, obviamente, un tema de eficiencia, ¿no es cierto? Los países, y yo creo que en todos los países, incluido ¿no es cierto?, que ha sufrido crisis prolongadas, importantes, sabemos que los recursos no sobran y por lo tanto hay una decisión ética, pero también una decisión económica en el sentido de ocupar bien los recursos, en el sentido de cómo podemos con los mismos recursos poder enseñar mejor a nuestros niños. Entonces, yo creo que son variadas estas razones.
Yo quiero lanzar una pregunta para abrir, ¿no? Tenemos una serie de barreras, o creemos que hay una serie de barreras que nos dificultan el trabajo en el centro ¿no?, fundamentado o informado en evidencias. Tenemos diferentes razones por las que trabajar o incluir las evidencias dentro del aula. Cuando hablamos de evidencias educativas, de evaluación educativa, ¿no? Muchas veces tendemos a poner rankings. ¿Qué opinión tenéis de los rankings? ¿No? Generalmente lo ponemos todo en el mismo saco, pero hay unas cosas que funcionan mejor. Lo habéis ido hablando a lo largo del workshop, de las ruedas de prensa y hoy, ¿no? Que es, a lo mejor los rankings son como, esto es, ¿no?, van muy fuertes, ¿no? De esto es así, son statements que son como únicos. ¿Qué opinión tenéis?
Yes, I mean, measurement is always problematic because there are consequences of that measurement. And whether you use norm-based tests, which are effectively positioning students relative to the overall distribution, or whether you use criterion reference tests that look at a benchmark or a competency, however you do it, you end up with potentially a ranking of where the students are in that list. And when you think about it, the way education functions in society demands that ranking. We want to know who goes to which university, we want to know who goes into which job, and we can't avoid that ranking and sorting function. But we know that has disadvantages in terms of the performance of students, particularly those at the bottom of those rankings. So the question for me is, how do we make assessments and judgments about student performance that don't have those negative consequences? How healthy is it to know where you are in that distribution? What do you want to know? I mean, I think these are really complex questions about what we value in education and what we want our education system to do. The teacher does need to know about performance, though. So overall, I think for me, it's important that we do use tests and objective measurements, at least to inform our professional judgment. What then happens to those and how they're used by the class, by the school, and by society is problematic. Because we absolutely know that when we've known this since the 1960s, when Campbell's law was formulated, that the higher stakes a test is, the more it will narrow the educational opportunities that children have. So if you just measure literacy and numeracy and you don't measure everything else, then literacy and numeracy will take more time, they'll take more importance. But we don't want to measure everything else. We don't want to measure dance and sculpture and art and music and history and have children in rankings for everything. That would be appalling. So how we solve this conundrum, I think, is a real challenge. We need measurement, we can't avoid it, but how do we mitigate, how do we lessen the worst effects of that system and that approach? I don't have an answer.
Okay. No sé si hay alguna pregunta entre los que habéis venido.
Te puedo contestar si quieres lo de ranking también desde una perspectiva.
Así les damos
aplicada.
tiempo a que vayan pensando en dudas
Sí.
que puedan tener.
Básicamente, a ver, por lo menos desde nuestra perspectiva, la medición es clave, pero en general estamos bastante en desacuerdo con rankear. Creemos que es bastante dañino en general como se ha ocupado tradicionalmente, que es básicamente para hacer competir a profesores, a escuelas, etc. Sin embargo, y simplemente para poner ahí, quién sabe, la dificultad que también mencionaba, ¿no es cierto?, Steve, es que en algunos casos sí te puede llegar a servir incluso con objetivos de equidad. ¿Ya? Y pongo dos ejemplos concretos. existe una evidencia bastante importante de que a veces cuando tomamos, por ejemplo, cuando hay ingreso a la universidad, generalmente la mayoría de los países tienen exámenes únicos. Y ese examen único, el puntaje, está muy relacionado con el nivel socioeconómico de los alumnos. Sin embargo, cuando tomamos el ranking relativo de cada uno de estos jóvenes al interior de cada escuela, independiente del nivel de la escuela, eso tiene un mayor poder predictivo de cómo te va a ir en la universidad o en la educación superior. Por lo tanto, eso te está diciendo que uno podría tomar a los mejores alumnos, incluso de escuelas malas, que no les va bien en este examen único y de hecho les va mejor. En Chile se está haciendo eso y efectivamente ha mejorado mucho la equidad del ingreso e incluso mejora el pool de alumnos desde el punto de vista de equidad y de performance. Entonces, algunos rankings pueden servir. Y pongo el segundo ejemplo, que tiene que ver a veces rankear. Tendemos a ver aquellos países que tenemos puntaje, que hay muchos por lo menos en América Latina, desconozco un poco bien el caso español, pero básicamente donde hay puntajes por escuela, y más o menos uno puede más o menos también ver que les va bien y mal, eso, bueno, desde Bourdieu en adelante uno sabe, ¿no es cierto?, que eso está muy relacionado al capital social de las familias. Pero en cambio si uno ocupa rankings, pero no rankings, sino que clasificaciones de efectividad controlando por cada grupo, a mí me tocó estar en una reforma financiera que hizo eso, y básicamente lo que hace es buscar dentro de cada grupo socioeconómico quiénes les va mejor y quiénes les va peor. No con el fin de premiar, sino que en realidad cómo apoyar a los que les va peor, también es otra forma de ocupar el ranking con un objetivo de equidad. Entonces, no tanto preocupado de quién le va mejor en este caso, sino que a nivel de escuela quién le va peor y focalizar ese. Ahora, lo importante es el disclosure que uno hace de esa información, si se ocupa o no se ocupa. O sea, no se ocupa, digamos, para hacer competir en el mercado educativo, para que los papás elijan, etcétera, que creo que eso es muy dañino, o si es que se ocupa en realidad para efectos administrativos internos, para ver dónde apoyar mejor. Entonces yo creo que nuevamente es compleja esa utilización.
Gracias, Javier. ¿No? ¿Seguimos sin preguntas por aquí? ¿Sí? Pablo. ¿Te paso yo el mío?
Con la cantidad de estudios, de conocimiento que sale de las universidades, ¿cómo un profe o como un directivo o una directiva o como incluso alguien que administra la educación puede determinar si una evidencia es suficientemente robusta o no lo es para luego aplicar cambios? Claro.
Yes, I mean, that's difficult because there is too much evidence to synthesize easily. So as a researcher, I have to make choices about what we include. I've been surprised in England that we haven't had more challenge to the way that we classify the security or the strength of evidence, and that schools appear to be happy to trust the Education Endowment Foundation to do that. I think if I was a single researcher in a university, schools would be much more skeptical. The other thing that we do, although almost nobody looks at it, is we have our methodology on the website, and we have all of the data through for the basis on which those decisions are made. So we're trying to make the process as transparent as possible. So if someone does want to look, they can see, they can look at our methodology, they can question either the methodology or they can question whether we've applied the methodology correctly, but we try and make that transparent. So that's tough. The types of research, that's also contentious. We privilege studies that we think have strong causal claims. That means privileging particular kinds of research. That really, really, really annoys some of my colleagues in universities who don't like the fact that I don't seem to be taking notice of their research. Ideally, I'd love a toolkit that had the causal evidence, the developmental evidence, and then the experiential evidence of teachers and pupils, and you could map the whole thing. But I had to start somewhere, so I started with the causal evidence. And I think that was the right decision, but I'd love to create the whole map.
So just picking up the question more about how do you support principals or head teachers to know what the quality of the evidence. So one of the things that we do through the Research Schools Network is we run training programs, and part of that could be raising awareness, so trying to create critical consumers of the evidence is what we call it. So we take them through various good, less good, dreadful pieces of research and get them to look at, so where's the authority? Why would you... No, it's none of Steve's. I think you're probably at the top end. But get them to look at, so what's the authority? How do we know that this is credible? To get them to look at what are the results? What's the data saying? Are the graphs or any charts in there, are they only focusing on the positives? You would always expect to see, so what are the limitations in any piece of research? So what were the negative aspects of it? But so taking them through those steps actually, so that they become more able to challenge researchers in universities, to get in touch with Steve to say, you wrote this, tell me about it, I don't believe it. So it's a long process, but we're trying to create that dialogue within the profession. Okay.
Hola, mi pregunta es, hemos hablado mucho de la implementación de la evidencia en las escuelas, pero parte de esta evidencia también tiene implicaciones políticas. Entonces, ¿cómo reaccionan los gobiernos? ¿Qué reacción hay en Reino Unido por parte de los que tienen responsabilidades en la administración a estas evidencias, que a veces pueden cuestionar algunos de sus planteamientos políticos?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. The Education Endowment Foundation was set up with a grant initially from government. So they gave £125 million to the Sutton Trust and the Impetus Trust to invest in the stock market to create a foundation which would survive on the proceeds of those investments. So they started it and made it independent, but there's clearly a relationship between the two. EF tries to negotiate that relationship sensitively. So it tries to inform policy. In fact, it probably tries to inform things before they become policy, because that's when you need to get in with the evidence. It's usually too late once a policy's been formed. And there are occasional times when I know the chief executive has been summoned to see a minister. And I've certainly written briefing documents for EEF to justify the basis on which the recommendations are made. And so far, they've never pushed back further than that. So they've asked, questioned, but they've never said no, because they set up the EEF in the first place. So it's an interesting balance. But you're quite right, there are some areas of policy that are contentious. So ability grouping is one. Our inspection agency thinks that it's more efficient to put students in similar groups. Well, that has negative consequences for your low-attaining pupils. It also pushes very strongly phonics. English is a very irregular language, so you've got to learn lots of exceptions in vowel sounds in particular. It's much, much harder than Spanish at that stage. So it pushes a particular form, but we've contradicted that in some of the evidence from the EF, because we argue for a balanced approach between, if you like, identifying those sound symbol mappings, but also developing understanding. And the two need to go hand in hand. As you learn to read, you have to make sense of what you read. It's no good being able to read a page. I can read a page of Spanish with a very bad accent. I haven't a clue what it means, because I know how the letter sounds are produced. Now, that's useless to a learner. So those are the areas of conflict that we've had.
Iré con otra pregunta. ¿Cuáles son aquellas iniciativas o aquellas acciones o aquellos proyectos, ¿no?, que ya tú, que tienes tanto conocimiento del toolkit, que más efectivas son en educación, ¿no? Porque llevamos con Steve desde ayer y hoy, hemos estado en un workshop, hemos estado en diferentes entrevistas y al final, cuando la conversación acaba siendo más distendida, es como un oráculo, ¿no? Porque como tiene todo el conocimiento del toolkit es, pero esto funciona, pero los grupos, dividir grupos funciona, pero poner una persona, un adulto más en clase va bien. Entonces, no sé si se va a mojar o no, pero ¿qué dice la evidencia que es aquello más efectivo?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to answer that question slightly differently. I think what I've learned from accumulating the evidence in the toolkit is something we probably knew already. If you put the toolkit list in order, you can see that the most effective things are all to do with the quality of teachers' and learners' interaction. So it's about the quality of feedback, it's about the way the teacher gets learners to take the responsibility for their learning, it's about peer interaction, it's about developing oral and spoken language capability. So that for me is all about the quality of interaction that takes place in classrooms. It's teachers and the quality of the environments they set up for interaction that will make the difference. At the other end of the toolkit are the structural things. Now they may be necessary to have in place, but the length of lessons or the length of the school day or whether or not you wear a school uniform or the colour of the walls in your classroom make very little difference in developed countries. Those structural factors, once they're in place, they make very little difference to the quality of education that takes place. So what I'd argue is look for approaches that will improve the quality of interaction between teachers and learners. How do you build up learning trust in learners so the teachers can challenge them and the learners accept that challenge, so work harder for longer, more efficiently or more effectively? I know I'm repeating that a lot, but unless we see changes in what pupils do, what students do, we won't see any improvement in learning. So how do changes in interaction, the amount of talk, the quality of that talk, the quality of feedback that teachers give to learners, how do the programs enable that? People often think in education that it's the programs that work. It's one of my big arguments with researchers in the United States. They badge programs as making a difference. Programs and approaches are only catalysts. They're structures that change the quality of interaction in classrooms. It's the teacher and the students who do the work. The program is a catalyst to do that. We need to believe that teachers have agency and that pupils have agency to take charge of and control their learning. And if we're not careful in evidence-based approaches, we focus too much on the structures and not on the quality of the interaction. So that's not really an answer to your question, but it's the only one I'm going to give.
But I like the answer.
Okay.
Por decirlo al principio en broma, ¿qué otras profesiones no eres científico al principio, pero a mitad te debes de haber convertido en un científico? O por decirlo de otra manera, ¿qué evidencia, o sea, cuál es la manera más eficiente de hacer esa reconversión en tu ser profesor sin dejar el aula? Sin dejar el aula.
¿Cómo? Yo no acabo de entender yo.
¿Cómo puedes volverte un profesor que sí se basa en una evidencia, que no te lo han exigido el primer día que tú llegas ahí, ni al cuarto año, ni te lo van a exigir, pero te convences de que debes ser otro estilo de profesor? ¿Cómo puedes hacer, o sea, qué está estudiado? ¿Cómo puede hacer un profesor ese proceso? Y ya os digo, sin dejar el aula.
Yeah, that's difficult because that's an attitudinal change about how I thought about my performance. Partly, perhaps, it was me looking at the medical profession and seeing what they do and arguing that education is different, but we can still learn from what medicine does. And what they do is they equip doctors with more knowledge before they become doctors. Now, we can't afford to do that. We're never going to have 6-year education programs, but believe me, there is 6 years' worth of study to be had in the evidence that's there about effective teaching and learning. So we've got to change the orientation of the profession to see themselves as continual learners, and setting up learning communities in schools. And that's, I think, the shift. It's not being satisfied with your performance in your first year and then repeating that for 40 years. It's thinking about how do I improve what I do each year and looking for external support and help to do that. I wish I had an easy answer to your question, because then I'd be a very, very rich man. How do you turn that so people become engaged and want to do it themselves? That's a real challenge.
Creo que hay una pregunta. Mientras te pasan el micro, lanzaré una pregunta a Juliet, porque va conectado con algo que ha dicho Steve. ¿Podrías describir brevemente, pero qué es una research school? Porque va en relación al docente que trabaja con evidencias, y no solo el docente en este caso, sino también el centro educativo. Para contextualizar un poco, porque es una iniciativa extendida en Inglaterra, hay 39 research schools en red, y realmente es admirable y necesario de compartir.
Okay, so what's a research school? So if I take you back to something I said a few minutes ago about being the bridge between evidence and practice, I'll talk about Kyra Research School. We're based in the East Midlands near Nottingham, and our challenge is to create alliances and communities where. Sorry, I was. I wondered why I was getting confused. So we create communities of practice, professional learning networks really, and try to get teachers to work together to explore the evidence. But as a research school, we start by pushing the evidence out. So we might start with the guidance reports that the Education Endowment Foundation has written, because they're written in an accessible way that relate or translate very easily into practice in the classroom. Other things that we do, we deliver CPD, continuing professional development, but all of the CPD is generally over 3 days, with probably about 6 weeks between each day. It's all based on the evidence, so we use what do we know that has worked, so how do we bring that into the CPD that we run. So it's a whole process really across England to try and change the conversation, inform people, but also be there. It's a bit like being the grit in the oyster. Being a little bit of an irritant, so instead of accepting what people say, we will always say, well, what does the evidence say? So it's a bit like being a broken record, but really important that somebody is saying that and somebody is putting the challenge out there into the system. So it's a bit of a long answer. Each research school is slightly different as well, because context matters.
Una de las cosas características de la Research School, que ellos como lo deben tener muy incorporado, si tú preguntas a docentes de este tipo de colegios, siempre tienen una razón de por qué hacen las cosas. Si tú les dices, ¿por qué estás llevando a cabo esta práctica? ¿O por qué tienes al alumnado en grupos más pequeños? Te dicen un porqué. Y si no tienen el porqué, te dirán seguramente que lo están pilotando. Porque siempre que quieren llevar a cabo alguna iniciativa, ¿no? Si yo soy un profe del claustro y yo qué sé, pues tengo una idea de trabajar, no sé, las matemáticas, lo diré, entonces me dirán, ¿qué dice la evidencia? Lo vamos a mirar, y si la evidencia no dice nada, pero la propuesta puede ser fundamentada, al menos en teoría, lo que vamos a hacer, si creemos que puede encajar en el colegio, es pilotarlo. Y claro, de esta manera es un aprendizaje continuo en el centro educativo. Marta, ¿tenías una pregunta?
Sí, más que una pregunta era un comentario a la última intervención que hacía un profesor sobre cómo reconvertirse, ¿no? Más o menos, o cómo empezar a hacer una práctica educativa basada en pruebas cuando hasta ahora no se ha hecho. El comentario que yo quería hacer, y es una pelea personal que tengo, es que creo que en general en este país hay que mejorar la formación universitaria de los futuros profesionales de la educación. No puede ser que un futuro docente salga de una facultad de educación sin saber qué es un estudio científico, qué partes tiene, cómo funciona la ciencia, sin saber hacer las preguntas fundamentales que lanzabais antes sobre un recurso, un método nuevo que le llega para garantizar que realmente tiene pruebas sólidas suficientes. No puede ser que un futuro docente salga de la universidad sin saber qué es una base de datos, por ejemplo. ¿Cuáles son las principales revistas de educación en investigación educativa? Sin conocer, por ejemplo, Education Endowment Foundation, por poner un ejemplo. Y lo mismo con la formación continua del profesorado. Creo que hay que dotar a nuestra profesión de cultura científica desde la formación inicial pasando por la continua, sin duda.
Me ha venido muy bien la respuesta de Marta porque me deja cerrar, ¿no?, envolver todo esto en clave de qué puede hacer un docente si quiere iniciar esta andadura en todo el tema de las evidencias. Tenemos a la Education Endowment Foundation, también tenéis a Suma, también nos tenéis a nosotros. Nosotros desde la, ¿no?, hablaba de Education Endowment Foundation, nosotros hemos traducido el toolkit al castellano, lo tenéis en nuestra web. Tenemos una serie de materiales que hemos elaborado con Suma, que son guías para el profesorado. Hemos desarrollado 2 de momento, que son sobre feedback, sobre cómo dar retroalimentación en el alumnado y cómo llevar a cabo el aprendizaje cooperativo. Son 2 de las líneas que más efectivas y económicas son. Así que vamos trabajando en esa línea, vamos intentando aportar recursos a la comunidad docente entre diferentes entidades para aquellos profesores, docentes, profesionales de la educación en general que quieran empezar, porque es un camino seco y es difícil, pero realmente es posible y es necesario, porque tenemos mucho en la boca y en la conciencia general, que está bien, que el tiempo cambia, ¿no?, y que la educación se tiene que adaptar a este tiempo, pero ¿qué cambiamos? ¿Cómo lo cambiamos? No va bien, pero ¿qué no va bien? Tenemos realmente evidencias de qué es lo que no va bien, y si realmente queremos llevar a cabo iniciativas nuevas, ¿cómo vamos a saber si van bien o no? Entonces, la evidencia, en este caso de transformación, ¿no?, y reevolución educativa, nos viene muy bien para tener fundamento. Antes, en la rueda de prensa, estaba también Kate Atkins, que es una directora de una research school, y decía que cuando le va un inspector al centro, le dice, oye, pero esto que haces, pues no me gusta o me gusta, y ella dice, bueno, espera, ven, que te voy a contar por qué lo estoy haciendo, porque aquí tengo la evidencia, ¿no?, y esto ha funcionado y lo he pilotado. Entonces, es una manera de tener discurso y justificar por qué has tomado esta decisión. Y vamos poco a poco, pero en nuestra casa, en Education, tenéis recursos que os vamos a ir ofreciendo fruto de las diferentes alianzas que hacemos con las entidades más pioneras. Y yo creo que sin más cerramos el acto. Os informo de una novedad que a finales de noviembre aproximadamente, en esta línea de evidencias que estamos abriendo, aparte de la alianza que tenemos con Suma y con la Education Endowment Foundation, vamos a abrir la segunda convocatoria, que es una evaluación de programas educativos. Lo que haremos a final de noviembre es invitaremos a distintos centros docentes a que nos presenten iniciativas, proyectos, programas que lleven a cabo en clave de desarrollo competencial del alumnado. De entre todas las que se presenten seleccionaremos una serie de iniciativas y las juntaremos con grupos de investigación estatal para que lleven a cabo pilotos y evalúen en el colegio y en otros centros de alrededor cómo va esa práctica. Y queremos ayudar a formar a los colegios que se presenten en parte queremos intentar traer la evidencia de las research schools aquí en España en el marco de este programa de evaluación, que tendréis más información si nos vais siguiendo en las redes sociales y en nuestra web, yo creo que a lo largo de noviembre, principios de diciembre. Y muchas gracias. Quiero dar las gracias a Javier González de Suma y a Suma por todo el trabajo que hacen y a la Education Endowment Foundation por la labor y por acompañarnos y ayudarnos y compartir todo su conocimiento con nosotros. Y a vosotros, muchas gracias.